Welcome back. The 2025 legislative session has been underway for about 2 weeks, and during this time, we've been learning what the priorities will be. Joining me to tell us about how they could impact you and your safety and your money as well, Channel 3's chief political reporter, Susan Raff. She's at the state capitol, and Dan Haar, senior editor and columnist with our media partner, CT Insider. Dan, I want to start with you, and I want to start not on the legislature because tomorrow there is a big event in Washington, and part of the news about the inaugural is that the governor will be attending. You will be as well. Do you think it's a big deal? Some Democratic governors said, I'm not going.
I think it's notable that the governor's going. There's only 4 that we know of, 4 Democratic governors going out of 23. And he views the importance of history and respect for the presidency more than he views, I'm afraid of what's going on with, and this was not my candidate, and all the Donald Trump stuff. That said, there are lots of very excited Republicans down here. I'll be on the Mall first thing in the morning. So it's a great place to be if you're looking at history, the peaceful transition of power. We learned 4 years ago that that is not something to take for granted.
All right. Susan, I want to turn to you up at the Capitol if we can. The legislative session is underway. Tell us about some of the big issues that you're watching up there right now. And I know electricity is on everybody's mind.
It is. I want to point out I am not going to Washington, but there's so much action going on here at the state capitol. In fact, as you mentioned, the legislative session just started, and already lawmakers are unveiling their priorities. Energy has to be one of those priorities, and it has become that simply for the fact that people are very upset over the bills, and lawmakers are struggling trying to come up with a solution. I think the bottom line here is, though, it's not an easy fix. It's not push a button and we're going to see our rates drop. There are some proposals on the table. If you remember the public benefits charge that's in your bill, that was put in place because the state helped people during the pandemic who couldn't pay their bills. That's in your bill. They're talking about putting that in the budget itself, the state budget, spreading that out over more people. They're also talking about taking off a charge for those electric vehicle charging stations and putting that in the general budget. Will that make a big difference? It will drop your bills down significantly, but the long-term issue here is creating more energy in the state of Connecticut to meet the supply. And they are talking about adding more nuclear power at Millstone, but that is something that will take, we heard, 3 to 5 years. So it's a long-term solution. One of the things we're also hearing about housing is also important. They're looking at that, trying to create more of that in education. There are more special needs students in our schools these days. But energy, again, is really the big topic here that people are focused on and doing something this legislative session.
Well, I'm glad you circled back to energy because I know I can get Mr. Haar fired up about this. They're going to fix the electricity bills?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, sure. I want to be really clear here. There are 2 things going on. One is there are long-term fixes to the price of electricity that are under consideration at the legislature. They have to do with 2 things. 1, public benefits. 2, generation supply and demand. Not demand, generation supply. We know demand is going up because of electrification. What isn't happening is that there are not any ideas that have to do with saving ratepayers' costs on the side of distribution and transmission. And yet, that's what the rhetoric is about. There is no complaint against Eversource and UI in respect to distribution and transmission that relates to your bills. I'll say it again. They aren't the reason your bill's going up. There's rhetoric and there are ideas. Some of the ideas make sense long-term, nuclear, that sort of thing. That's all great, what Susan said.
There's also taxes we're talking about. You did some reporting on that. Hold on, Susan, I'll come right back to you. You did some reporting on taxes this week.
Okay.
Tell me about what's happening with taxes.
A small increase. I had speculated that it might be a bigger thing on personal income tax like we saw 2 years ago. It's business taxes that are relatively small, having to do with small business fees mostly. That's what the governor said Thursday.
All right. Susan, let's turn back to you at the Capitol. I know you wanted to respond to Dan. I also want you to talk about these budget guardrails. We keep talking about it. The governor talks about it. Legislators talk about it. But people at home, do they care?
I think they should. I mean, when you hear something like fiscal guardrails, it can be a turnoff, right? People are like, what is that and why does that matter? Well, it does matter because we are in a situation in Connecticut right now where we do have quite a bit of money. We have a lot of money in the reserve, over $4 billion. And so people are saying, well, if that money is there, why can't we spend it? We hear from nonprofits. They've been at the state capitol this week asking for more money for education, asking for housing, all of these nonprofits. But the question is, why can't we use that money? And all has to do with what happened in 2017 when bipartisan lawmakers in the Senate, when it was evenly split, decided we needed those guardrails. It pays down pension. I think we can invest some $700 million a year because we save money in interest. All of that is very important when it comes to those guardrails, but the question is, will some, and including House Democrats, who have been talking about using some of that money for these nonprofits and investing in education. So those guardrails were put in place for a reason. No one is suggesting that we simply get rid of them. The question is, will they be adjusted to pay for some long-term investments?
Did you want to say something to Mr. Haar on electricity before we? I'd like to encourage you to yell at each other, but you're far away.
We do that plenty at the Capitol.
Well, one of the things that I've heard proposed is a smart meter, and it sounds kind of trivial. And again, this is a big, complicated topic, and it's going to take years probably for the state of Connecticut to increase its supply. And I'm not sure anyone is really going to see a huge drop in their bills. But smart meters are really cool, and that actually allows the homeowner to see on their phone how much energy or electricity they're using and when. So you'll be a smarter consumer, right? Massachusetts has them. So you know, for example, certain times of the day. We hear that a lot, right? If you run your dishwasher at night versus, in the peak hours. But it might be a good way for people to get more educated about the use of energy.
What else will you be watching in this new session?
Well, the UConn and CSCU budgets is going to be a big flashpoint, and that's exactly what Susan was talking about in respect to spending more money. It's not just social services, and it's not just K through 12, special ed. They all want money. UConn is going to be a really big clash because the UConn argument, slightly different from the CSCU argument. The UConn argument is more money spent on UConn is more investment return on your money. And you do better when you spend more on UConn. That's going to be the clash. Where's the money?
And it's an interesting discussion to have, Susan, when we're talking about a big surplus and lots of money to spend, and yet still a lot of conflict on some of these things. What are the other big issues you'll be watching?
Well, I think you're right. When there are times when we have budget deficits, the request for more money simply doesn't come so powerful or so strong. But now we are hearing it. Housing, as I mentioned, is a big issue. The governor has been trying to coax cities and towns to do more with that. A lot of cities and towns have been resistant, especially those in rural areas. And we're not just talking about dense apartments or big apartment complexes. We're talking about townhouses. I think the figure that I heard was that Connecticut is short about 90,000 housing units, and we want to make an important distinction here, and that is affordable housing. We don't need more $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 apartments or homes. We need more in terms of affordable. And again, education is also a big thing. And Dan highlighted this a little bit. All of these people looking for money. ARPA dollars are pretty much gone. Those were monies that we got from the federal government for pandemic relief. That money is pretty much spent. So people and agencies got used to spending that money, and now they're going to have to figure out some ways to either do without, or we may have to see lawmakers adjust those guardrails and give them money. So that could be pretty controversial.
Well, Dan has something else to say, but we're all out of time. So you're going to have to hold it until your next visit.
AI.
AI. We'll hear more about AI when he's on the show again. That's why I wanted to have you guys on early in the session. That means we can have you on several more times. Dan Haar, Susan Raff at the Capitol, thank you both for being with us.
Great to be here.